em Austin. Não, but I'm going to talk just in English. So, eu só vou explicar que eu vou falar em inglês porque é mais prático. Vocês não vão ficar botando, tirando o negocinho. Mas enfim, it's a pleasure to have you here, Marty. We are very happy. We know that you have so many invitations, and we are very lucky that you could come here. First of all, let me ask one of the first things that everybody here wants to know is about the movie, right? Are you really without any sense of humor as in the movie?
No, I have no sense of humor. Well, it's one of the things that my closest friends commented on was that I was portrayed without any sense of humor. And they said that they offered confirmation that I did have a sense of humor. So it's a small minority of people who think that I have one. But I think it's important to remember that that was a portrayal of one chapter of my life. It was about a 7-month period at the Boston Globe. I was new to Boston. I didn't know anybody at the paper. I didn't know anybody in Boston. We launched this investigation on the very first day. I understood the implications of that. Then 6 weeks later, with the attacks of 9/11, huge and traumatic event in the United States, that was followed by the anthrax attacks, which many people have forgotten about. So it was a very serious time, and I'm not sure if I displayed my great sense of humor at that particular moment.
No, but I can attest that he does.
Thank you.
But anyway, so the movie, were you surprised by the Oscar and the beautiful, wonderful repercussion around the world that the movie had, impact that the movie had, rather?
I was. I really had no expectation. In fact, I didn't expect them to make a movie in the first place. It's not the kind of movie that people are going to these days. It doesn't have special effects. It doesn't have superheroes. It doesn't have, it didn't have romance. It had the opposite of romance. And it was a challenge to a very powerful institution. And it clearly would have set perhaps a lot of people. And then I was sure the movie wouldn't be made when there was a new pope who was named. And he was a popular pope as opposed to an unpopular pope. And I thought for sure that would be the death of the movie. Making the movie, and that's exactly when the movie came together, when all the actors signed on, they received financing, and they were able to go ahead. But I didn't have an expectation about what kind of impact it would have. I was surprised. I think we were actually, when it won the Oscar, all of the reporters were there, in addition to all the actors and other people involved with the film. And we thought another movie was going to win the Best Picture, and for sure. And so we were shocked.
Yeah, it was wonderful. When I saw it in Austin, it was one of the rare moments that I saw the public applauding. I mean, you don't see that in movies a lot, right? And I know that there is this movie is actually considered by many people as along with the All President's Men, the two best journalistic movies ever. And I know that now Spielberg is doing another movie that involves the Post and journalism. Can you talk a little bit about that? Are you familiar with the movie?
Yeah, there's a movie being that he's making now that involves the reporting around the Pentagon Papers, which was the secret history of the Vietnam War of the United States. There was a gentleman by the name of Daniel Ellsberg who had worked on those papers for a while, and then he took it upon himself to disclose those papers, sort of like Edward Snowden did with NSA documents more recently. And the New York Times was the first to publish those papers. They were then prevented from publishing more stories by courts, and then the Washington Post was scrambling to catch up on that story. And was planning to publish, and then was threatened by the White House at the time, the White House of Richard Nixon. And so that's the story.
Yeah, I heard that the New York Times, that they were jealous of this movie because it would, Watergate is Washington Post, and Pentagon Papers is the New York Times, but Spielberg is kind of focusing on the Post, right?
Yeah, he is, because, and yes, the New York Times, I think, is upset about it, understandably, because they were the first to expose the papers. But there was particular drama at the Washington Post. Catherine Graham had just taken over. Her husband had committed suicide. She took over the newspaper. A lot of people questioned whether she had the capabilities to do that. She was the first woman owner of planning to sell shares to the public, and it needed the money desperately at that particular time. So there was a lot of drama at the Washington Post, and it's a great case study of what happens when the White House really brings pressure on a news organization, and how that news organization stood up to the White House. So I think Steven Spielberg feels that this is a instructive lesson for those of us today, not just for the press, but for the public as well.
Yeah, and I heard that he's doing this in a rush, so it would be launched in the first year of Donald Trump.
Yes, I think the plan is to have it come out in the last week of December, and I think he feels very strongly that this is a movie that needs to be made now, that the public needs to see this, that these are the kinds of issues that need to be raised.
Can you imagine Donald Trump's tweet about this movie?
I can imagine. Yes, I can.
How is to be the editor of the Washington Post in Trumplandia, in Trumpland?
Well, you know, it's an interesting time. I mean, journalistically, it's fascinating and exhilarating and energizing. I think our staff is highly motivated. At the same time, we're confronting a lot of attacks on us in the press, including and especially the Washington Post and the New York Times, CNN, some other media organizations as well, the major networks. So it's unusual. I mean, we haven't seen these kinds of attacks on the press since the Nixon administration, actually, who also launched many severe attacks on the press in his time, and used a lot of the same language, calling the press the enemy. He didn't say enemy of the people, he said enemy of the administration, but now the language being used by President Trump is stronger than even Nixon used at his time.
Yeah. I mean, I heard in one of your interviews that you said something that we are not at war with.
I'll help you here.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think I remember what I said.
Yeah.
Actually.
So that person should say.
I might be. So, you know, the president has said. Actually, the president said on his the first day after he took office, after his inauguration, he went to the CIA and met with them, and he said, "You may know that I have a running war with the media." And what I said is that he says he's at war with the media, but we're not at war with the administration. We're at work. And this is our job. Our job is to hold the administration accountable, to do reporting, to talk about the facts. I mean, we have in the United States, obviously, the First Amendment to the Constitution, which guarantees free speech, free press, the right to assemble, for people to assemble and protest if they wish, the right to petition the government when you have a grievance, all of that. The whole purpose of that First Amendment is to hold the government accountable. It's what the founders of the United States envisioned when they approved the First Amendment. And so that is our job in the United States, and I think it's the job of the press throughout the world, is to hold powerful institutions, powerful individuals, and especially the government, which is probably the most powerful institution in any country in the world, accountable.
But there is one thing that I have been debating is that, you know, we are getting sick and tired of saying that this is not normal, right? This is not normal. And when you come and you say, we need just to do our work, it's not just doing our work. We have to explain to the public what journalism is, and it go to the motto, the slogan that the Washington Post has adopted, right? Democracy dies in darkness, right? I mean, it's not normal. It's not enough just to do our job? What is different now, considering the uniqueness of the attacks of Trump?
Right. Well, first, I would say, first of all, let's do our jobs. Let's do our jobs the way they're supposed to be done. I think that's the basics. It's not always the case, but I think that we have to dedicate ourselves to doing our jobs, not just reporting on what people say, but reporting on what people actually do. And that's, I think, our responsibility. At the same time, I think that we have to be more open with the public about how we go about our work. For many people in the public, it's a mystery as to what we do and how we do it. And we have to be, I think, more transparent than we have been in the past, showing more original documents, offering on the internet, obviously, audio and video, whatever we can do to show the public more of our work, I think we should do.
And the Washington Post has been doing this in an exemplary way and having a sort of a rivalry with the New York Times that has almost gone to the old golden years of that rivalry. Who's winning?
Well, I don't view it as a rivalry, personal rivalry between me and the editor of the New York Times. We happen to be friends, good friends. And I don't necessarily view it as a rivalry between the two organizations. We are competitors. We should be competitors. I think the public should be grateful that we have two media institutions and others as well that are vigorously pursuing the stories that we want to pursue. I don't keep a score on who's winning. I would say that, in my view, the public wins, and that's the winner in this game.
The editor of the New York Times said that your slogan looks like a Batman movie, darkness.
Yes, and then he asked for an apology from me, and I said, he asked whether I would forgive him, and I said, no apologies necessary from the people of Gotham. So, I am Batman.
Well, let's go back to the beginning, the spotlight and the Washington Post now. What is the role of investigative journalism in this new newsroom of the Washington Post, and what have you done in terms of improving the investigative journalism?
Well, I think investigative journalism is very much part of the identity of the Washington Post. It's the newspaper became famous during the Watergate investigation, and I think people's impression of the Washington Post was very much formed by that investigation, which actually brought down the president in that instance. Nixon had to resign, and it was a huge scandal in our country. So I think that investigative reporting is part of the soul of the Washington Post. Some people business people like to call it our brand. I like to call it our soul. I can identify with that more. It's sort of who we are, the essence of who we are. So we have investigative reporting throughout. We have a separate unit for investigations.
Like the Spotlight?
Yes, but it's not called Spotlight. It doesn't actually have a name. It's just called the investigative unit. We just doubled the size of that. We added 8 more people to that team, so it's now about 16 people on that team. The purpose of the 8 additional people is what we call a rapid response investigation, to do rapid response investigations. And that is that you shouldn't just wait to get the entire story. We don't want to wait months to produce our investigations, as historically some investigative reporting has required. So we would like to do it more quickly, more in the moment, and because we think that people need that information now. We were inspired, I have to say, by some of the work that was done by David Farenthold, who covered the charitable activities of Donald Trump, or lack of charitable activities of Donald Trump. And during that, he reported what he was doing along the way. He didn't wait to get the entire picture of that. He approached it in a more incremental way. And not only that, he was quite open with the public about what he was doing, what he was working on. He would actually take photos of his notes and the organizations that he had talked to, and then enlist the public and saying, who else should I talk to? And actually, when he knew that one of Donald Trump's charities had acquired paintings of Donald Trump, that he wanted to find these paintings, and he asked the public for their help. And somebody went through all of TripAdvisor and looked at all the photos of all the clubs and facilities that Donald Trump owned, and actually found photos of this painting. And then somebody with Univision, the network in the United States, one of the anchors there, Enrique Acevedo, he went to the Doral Country Club in Miami, and then of course spoke to the workers there, asked where the painting was. They showed him the painting. He took a picture. He sent it to David Farenhold, and he was able to report that the painting, at least one of the paintings, had been found.
Vocês podem começar a fazer perguntas e mandar aqui para o Leandro vai fazer uma seleção passando para mim. The first question from the public here, Natalia Matos, uma estudante da ESPM, is asking about access, how the Washington Post has been facing the problems of access to information in the Trump administration. Actually, the problems have been that you have been facing even from the campaign, right? Trump did not like you.
Well, that's true. I mean, during the presidential campaign, during the primaries, when Trump was running against a bunch of other Republicans, I think 16 other Republicans, he was very unhappy with the coverage of the Washington Post and some other media outlets, and they withdrew our press credentials so that we couldn't have access the way other members of the press did. So we would just have to be a member of the public, like everybody else. And that carried over into the general election for about a month or two, and then they relented and decided that they were no longer going to prohibit us from covering the campaign like other press. Oddly enough, during that entire campaign, even when we were excluded from press events, we were working on a biography of Donald Trump, and we asked for interviews with him, and he gave us an incredible number of interviews. He gave us 20 hours of interviews for the biography. And now with the White House, and it's interesting, we have a lot of people within the White House and in the administration who are providing us information. It's not always on the record, but not always with their names attached. So there are a lot of leaks. And actually, behind the scenes, we do have a professional relationship with any number of people within this administration. But publicly, the president has been very hostile toward us, has criticized us severely, uses the worst names possible to describe us.
News?
That's one of them. That's not even the worst. Garbage. He called us the lowest form of humanity. That wasn't enough, so he called us the lowest form of life itself. And then he came up with enemy of the American people. And the objective there is to delegitimize us, to discredit us, to marginalize us, to and I think dehumanize us. And that is the objective. And also to try to portray the press as not an independent interpreter of what's happening, but to position us to try to portray us as the opposition party, to use its own words.
Yeah, actually, one of the questions from the audience is exactly about that, saying that how the media in the United States, because the media of the United States endorse candidates, etc., but on the other hand have an impartial stand. So, what is your position? And I would add how difficult it is to be neutral in administration that is openly at war against you.
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's nothing I can do about that, right? So I think that we need to do our jobs. Look, we do have endorsements in the United States. Not every newspaper has, but we do with the Washington Post. We have a long tradition and history in the United States of having the people who write the editorials be completely independent of the news department. I am not in charge of our editorials. I'm not in charge of our op-eds or things like that. I don't even oversee our letters, the letters to the editor. So whatever they do on the editorial page, they do on their own. They don't consult me. I don't advise them. They don't advise me on what to do on the news side. So we operate with entire independence. And that's where I view us as being independent. And I don't believe that being independent means you're the enemy or the opposition party. I think there's a substantial difference between them.
Yeah, you know, the other question moves us to Jeff Bezos and the 4 years. In October, I think you're gonna celebrate the 4th anniversary of your ownership by Jeff Bezos. And the question is about how are the guidelines to cover Amazon. But I would add, you know, how has been the relationship and the independence of the newsroom during the Jeff Bezos era that has started 4 years ago?
Well, when Jeff actually met with the staff shortly before, a few months before the deal actually closed, when they announced the deal, it was 3 months before the deal, his acquisition of the Washington Post closed, and he had a town hall meeting with the staff. And during that town hall meeting, he was asked this very question about coverage of Amazon, particularly since it's a company that generally, when it's asked questions by the press, says no comment.
Yeah, it's
not open much at all. So, but Jeff said, look, you cover us, you should cover us the way you cover any company. You should cover me the way that you cover any company, and that is what we've done. Is that we cover them the way that we would any other company. And so, and Jeff has given us in the newsroom complete independence. He does not get involved in the coverage at all in terms of individual stories that we should pursue, projects we should work on, investigations we should do, how we cover politics, any of that. He hasn't been involved in that at all. He's interested in the tactics and strategies at the Washington Post so that we can create a sustainable business model for our news organization.
Yes, and I think one of the main assets of the Washington Post was this separation. And I remember the movie, the book of Bob Woodward when Reagan calls Katharine Graham and start asking her something. She said, "Mr. President, just a moment, I think you're talking to the wrong person. I'm just the owner of the Washington Post. You have to talk with Ben Bradley, the editor. I don't mix myself with the editorial." So, Jeff,
yeah, that's a phrase we always like to hear. I'm just an owner.
Anyway, you were saying that he's understanding that. And,
absolutely, he doesn't. I mean, obviously, he has to be pleased overall with the kind of work we're doing. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here talking to you. I would be the ex-executive editor of the Washington Post. So, but I think he's pleased with the coverage overall. He doesn't get involved in, and he said that he's pleased with the coverage overall in the journalism that we're practicing. And it's been key to our success in a commercial sense as well. But he does not get involved in assigning stories, killing stories, commenting on stories, or anything like that.
And the success of the Washington Post, what extent it depends on the money that he has been injecting there. I mean, one thing is to be acquired and become self-sustainable. The other thing is to have the deep pocket channeling money to. What is going on? Where is your success coming from?
Right. Well, the first point I would make is that Jeff does not treat us as a charity. We're not a charity for him. And I always tell the people on our staff that we should be very grateful for that, because if he treated us like a charity and someday he got tired of this charity, we would be in deep trouble. So what he's trying to do is to help us create a sustainable business model for the Washington Post so that we can continue to practice the kind of journalism that is important to us and important, we believe, to the country and to the world. So that's what he's trying to do. Is his money important? Sure, of course. It's helped us experiment. He's given us what he calls runway, so time to let a variety of experiments play out. He has, but he's also brought, I think people focus only on the financial capital he has brought to us. I think you have to focus as well on intellectual capital that he has brought to us. I mean, keep in mind, he's somebody who, he knows technology, knows the internet, he understands consumer behavior, he runs a major consumer business, and all of that, I think, is helpful to us in sort of thinking about how we create a news organization that succeeds in a digital environment, and we are today in a digital environment.
And how often do you talk with him?
We have a teleconference with him once every 2 weeks. It lasts an hour. It tends to focus on new initiatives we have, or initiatives and how they're working and what we're learning from them in terms of what might succeed. Things like our pay model, things like traffic, things like new tools that we're using.
Is it transforming the Washington Post into a tech company?
I think we are becoming a technology company in addition to a journalism company, and I think that happens to be a very good combination, and I happen to think it's a necessary combination today. Technology is incredibly important to our business. We have spent too many years being laggards in terms of technology, being behind everybody else. And at the rate that things are moving, you can't be behind everybody else. You have to be at the vanguard. You have to be at the front end. So Jeff has not only invested in our newsroom, which is great, and which I really appreciate. It's been sort of targeted, strategic investing in our newsroom, but he's also invested heavily in our engineers, who work at the Post. I think we have approximately 100 more engineers than we had before, and we have now become a vendor of technology to other news organizations, including in Latin America.
Is the Marty bot available for purchase? Does they did a bot that bears his name, and what does the Marty bot do?
Okay, so I didn't expect this question. So we've changed our publishing schedule. What we wanted to do is get away from a print publishing schedule, where typically everybody's working at night to produce the stories that will appear in the following morning's newspaper. That is not a publishing schedule that is appropriate for a digital era, when people, first thing they get up in the morning is they're looking at their smartphone, they're looking at their laptop, whatever it might be, and then throughout the day they're looking for news. So we have tried to sort of move up our publishing, and we've modeled what we believe is the ideal trajectory for publishing news throughout the day, and we try to meet that. We don't always meet that, but we try to publish throughout the day. Have a lot of things first thing in the morning. It peaks around noontime, so we're publishing then as well, and then typically after dinner, U.S. time, Latin American time, there tends to be a little peak afterwards. So, one of the things was that we knew that editors would have to pressure reporters to get their stories in on time in order for us to meet that publishing schedule. And I said that it would be impossible if editors had to spend so much of their time haranguing, harassing reporters to finish their story and send it, and that they would stop doing that because it was so uncomfortable. So couldn't we design an automated alert that when we assign a time to a story, that about a half hour before the story was due, we would remind the reporter the story was due in a half hour, and if the story was late, there would be a reminder that an alert that your story is late.
That's the Marty bot.
That's the Marty bot. So I did not name it. Our engineers, in an act of vengeance, decided to name it after me and attach my photo to it.
So yes. Okay, so
much for good ideas, right?
Yeah. Well, you have several bots like this in the newsroom, and you're, I think any news organization could have that kind of pain in the neck of the editors. Fernando Rodriguez is asking here about numbers. He's obsessed with numbers these days. So he wants you to start giving some comparative numbers of before and after Bezos, in terms of the printing, of the digital circulation, number of journalists that you have, newsletters that you have. Okay, many numbers here, but anyway, but I know he knows the numbers. So, okay.
I know the numbers. I'm not going to tell you all the numbers. I'm going to tell you some of the numbers. So because some of them are proprietary and I'm not permitted to tell you them.
We respect that, but we will insist.
Okay, fine. You can insist, and I won't respond. Look, in terms of traffic, it's grown tremendously. Obviously, there was tremendous interest in Trump as well. So last year, we started to top 100 million unique visitors per month coming to our website. That continued into the early days of the Trump administration. That's now moderated to about 80 million unique visitors per month. In various months, we had actually exceeded the New York Times.
No rivalry, but you best.
I just mentioned it as a by the way. But they, to be honest, for the most part, they're ahead of us somewhat. So, but we'll see how it works out in the long run. So, we are working to fix that. Yes. So, so that's on traffic. Subscriptions, we don't provide the overall numbers, but our subscriptions, I can tell you, have grown by hundreds of thousands in this year alone. So in terms of the number of subscribers, it's grown by hundreds of thousands this year alone. So we've seen tremendous growth in subscriptions as people want to support the kind of work that we're doing. In terms of newsletters, we publish 70 newsletters. In terms of staff,
paid newsletter?
There are no paid newsletters. No, they're sponsored by an advertiser, but not paid newsletters. And we have different kinds of newsletters. Some that are authored, written by somebody. Some that are automated compilations, but somebody actually just reviews the compilation to make sure everything looks good. Others are curated, where specific selections are made by an editor as to what should be in the newsletter. So there are a variety of different kinds of newsletters. In terms of staff, we're now over 700 people in our newsroom, up about, I think it's about 150 or 160 people from the time that when Bezos acquired us almost 4 years ago. We are adding 60 people this year, 30 of them in video, 8 I mentioned in investigative reporting, and then a whole range of other areas of sort of spot news coverage and things like that.
Yeah. I heard from some people from Gotham City that you have been using a lot of clickbait kind of ways to boost your audience.
Well, the people of Gotham must be lying, because that's not the case. We don't do clickbait. I mean, you have to think about what is clickbait. Clickbait is a headline that's designed to get you to click, and then there's really no substance there. And we do not have that.
It's a trap.
It's a trap, and we just simply don't have that on our site. Do we have stories with good headlines? Yes, we do have good stories with good headlines, and I think we should write good headlines. And I think that, I'm constantly asked by people, how do you get people to read beyond the headlines? And my answer is, write a good headline, then they'll read more. And our objective is to write a good headline, and we can see that when we change a headline, immediately we'll get more readers to a story by a dramatic amount. We have the capacity now, the technology, to not just A/B test, but to test as many different options as we would like.
A, B, C, D, E.
A to Z, whatever. But
Can you
we don't.
explain? Maybe they don't know
Well,
what
we would
A/B test is.
Sure. I mean, we say we want to compare this headline versus that headline, this summary of the story versus that summary, this photo used with that story on our homepage as opposed to that photo used, or some combination of those. And so we try different approaches, and whichever one works the best, we can deliver different approaches to different sets of readers, and then whichever one is working best automatically becomes takes over, and that happens very quickly.
You developed a bot that does that,
Well,
algorithm or whatever.
this technology, I didn't do it. I couldn't do it. But our technology team has done that.
Yeah, so it is done online, right? So the same story is presented with 4 different headlines, and they in real time evaluate which headline works better and adopt that headline. So it's really great. It's not the only company that does that, but I heard that you sent a budget out to the publisher, and the publisher reject your budget. It happens very often in newspapers that the editor send the budget and it's sent back for more cuts, but it was not your case.
Well, it's been the case in the past for me, that's for sure. I mean, I went through many years where I had to make many cuts. I had to cut the staff 40%. I worked at the Boston Globe, where I worked for 11 and a half years. I cut the staff in the year and a half that I was editor of the Miami Herald. I had to cut the staff about 15%. And in my first year at the Washington Post, I had to cut the staff somewhat, not in a dramatic way. But since Jeff's acquisition of the Post, we've been investing. And he believes that in order to succeed, we have to grow, that you can't just cut your way to success, that you have to make strategic investments. And that's what he's been That's what he's brought to us, is the ability to make strategic investments, make the right ones, think through how we're going to invest, try to experiment, evaluate those experiments constantly, evaluate what kinds of changes we need to make. But at the core of that is absolutely at the core of the work we do, lest we get completely obsessed by technology, is the journalism that we do. I mean, that is the essence of it. As Jeff has said, it's like you can have the best marketing to get someone into a restaurant, but if the food isn't any good, nobody is coming back. And so we want to make sure that we're constantly providing high-quality journalism that is riveting, and journalism. He was at a conference recently, he said, what are the qualities for success? He said, make the journalism riveting, make sure it's right, and ask people to pay. And that's what we're doing.
And he also said in that conference that he's not going to cut the way out, but to grow the way out, right? And there's a question here saying, how can we take lessons from the Washington Post, from the special situation of the Washington Post, and apply to smaller newspapers, especially in countries like Brazil?
Right, well, I'm not an expert obviously, on the situation here in Brazil, and I won't pretend to be. So, but, I think there are lessons. The first lesson is to recognize that we live in a digital era. That is just a fact. Now, some of us may mourn a previous era of journalism that was, let's say, print-oriented, for those of us who worked in newspapers. I went through that period of mourning myself, but like every period of mourning, you need to get over it. If you have a dear relative or a dear friend who dies, you're going to mourn. But you have to go on and live the rest of your life the way it is. And you have to face the reality. And the reality is that we live in a digital world. It's a world dominated by social media, and it's a world dominated by mobile technology. And so that is the world in which we're operating, that is the future, and everybody needs to pay attention to that. And I think there's something more than that we have to emphasize, and that is the nature of storytelling needs to change. So, storytelling has always changed. People used to draw pictures on caves, and that was the story. We progressed from that point. And so we have newspapers. Even the way that we tell stories in newspapers has changed over the decades, if you go back and look at the old newspapers. But then when radio came into existence, it was a completely different medium, and you don't read the newspaper story on the radio. You have a certain way of communicating with listeners that is different from the way you communicate in print. Along came television, and they didn't use radio scripts. They use a different way of communicating. It's a highly visual medium, it needs to be different, and it's different from newspapers. But when the internet came along, our industry, in all its brilliance, decided that what we needed to do was put up newspaper stories in a digital form and say, now we're digital. That does not make us digital. And then when that didn't work, we said, let's put up those stories even faster. And then when maybe that helped, but it wasn't the answer. Now I think we're recognizing that this is an entirely different medium. Ordinary people interact with this medium in a very different way, and it requires a different form of storytelling, one that's more conversational, one that's more accessible, as if you and I were having a conversation friend to friend, or with me with a relative, and that deploys all these incredible tools that we now have.
Alexa.
Well, maybe we get to Alexa, but it includes tools like video and audio and annotations and interactive graphics and all of that. And then we have these incredibly powerful tools for telling stories that can tell stories better than we ever did, actually, in print. So we should use those.
Well, so another question from the audience is about how to explain to a company that is in crisis, like other newspapers, that investigative journalism is important as part of the way out. Do you have any argument to use in favor of investigative journalism?
I do. I think in the past we always tried to make a moral case for investigative journalism, and there is a powerful moral case to be made for investigative journalism. It's one that I've made over the course of my entire career. But now we actually have, I think, a business case to be made for investigative journalism. We see in the subscriptions that we get, and those hundreds of thousands of additional subscriptions that we got this year, and the hundreds of thousands, and the many that we got in the previous year, that people are particularly supportive of investigative journalism. They want us to hold powerful institutions and individuals accountable, and they will actually support us by paying for a subscription, because there is a growing recognition that if people don't pay for quality journalism, they won't get quality journalism. So we know that investigative reporting and high-quality journalism is absolutely key to generating subscriptions.
Okay, let's move on. Yeah. Okay. So what? The creation of the team of women journalists in the Washington Post to produce content for women. That is a new thing that
Yes.
you have just created, and they have another one that connects here. How the it's about diversity in the Washington Post newsroom. What's your effort to make it more?
All right. Well, so
start with the one.
Okay. We just launched a new product called the Lily. It's named the Lily because that was the name of the first woman-owned newspaper in the United States. And it is a product for millennial women. It is not frivolous, it is serious, it deals with serious subjects that would be of interest to more serious-minded millennial women, and which we think pretty much everybody is. And so it's situated. That's one area where we have a hard time getting an audience, is among younger women. And so we decided that we have to go where they are, on the platforms where they are, and customize our work for for that audience. We think we have a lot that we produce that is of interest to them, but that they don't find it. And it needs to be adapted for these different platforms. So we started essentially on Medium and Facebook. We will roll it out to other platforms as well. It looks very different from the Washington Post. Many of the stories there come from the Washington Post, but they've gone through some editors who have sort of adapted it for that particular medium. They've designed it in a certain way, they've synthesized it in a certain way, and it's off to an incredibly great start. In terms of diversity, if you want me to answer that one, I would say that the last numbers that I've seen are about 1/3 of our staff, or to use the phrase that's used in the United States, people of color, and that is minorities of one type or another. And that's pretty good for a news organization of our size. It's higher than most. There are some newspapers that have higher percentages, but they tend to be in places like Miami or something like that, which have a larger minority population.
Well, there's a very punctual question here about it. When David Fahrenthold decided to use Twitter as part of the investigation, he did this on his own, or he checked with the editors first to see if it was,
he did it on his own. I'm so glad he didn't ask any of us for permission.
That's my rule, never ask
in that instance. There are a lot of terrible things people do on Twitter that I wish they wouldn't do, and I wish they would ask us. But Erie was using it in the service of journalism, and it was a good idea, and it worked exceptionally well.
Yeah. Someone wants to know what you do in the morning when you wake up, and do you read Axios, New York Times, Twitter, or you go to?
Yes. I do all those. I grab my mobile phone, and I just start looking through the emails that have arrived, and I look at our any alerts that we have put out. I look at our website quickly. I look at some of the newsletters. Once I get out of bed, I'm looking at all the newsletters that we have that are out there, whether it's Axios or Politico or some of the other ones that are out there, our own that we put out overnight. And
you start firing angry
no,
emails, or
no, I try not to be angry in the morning, so it's not always the case. But I'm pretty much. I don't. Occasionally, I'll send an email about something, but that's about it.
There are a few questions about the American media coverage of the campaign, and what responsibility does the media in the United States have for the Trump phenomenon. Do you do any self-criticism about the way you portrayed Trump during the campaign, giving him more visibility?
Well, look, let's keep in mind.
Blame TV only.
Well, I don't blame ourselves, I have to be honest about it. I don't think we did anything wrong, quite honestly. I think we did a very good job during the campaign. That we took him seriously from the very beginning, and we should take him seriously. Keep in mind that from almost the beginning, he had the support of about 30% of the Republican voters, which in a field of about, I guess, was 17 candidates, he was going to be the lead candidate. So we did take him seriously. And that meant that we looked at his career and his life, and we vetted it. We looked at his business deals. We looked at his relationships. We looked at everything. We were so deep into Donald Trump that we decided to do a book. And we actually dedicated 20 reporters from our newsroom to producing that book fairly quickly. And the reason we needed 20 is because we wanted to go very deep in different aspects of his life and his career and do it quickly. And we had to make sure that every last detail was correct. Because we would capitalize on anything that wasn't exactly right. He even capitalizes on things that are right, so you know that he's going to capitalize on something that's not right. So it was a major project. So I think that we went very deep on him. We took him seriously, as we should. Look, I mean, I think that some of the cable companies that aired his rallies, that broadcast his rallies that went on for hours without interruption, without contradiction, without any real journalism being applied to it, amounted to free advertising for him. They didn't do that for anybody else's campaign, and I think that that's questionable. Where do I criticize ourselves? I criticize there is one thing that led to Donald Trump's election is the deep level of anxiety and grievance in certain sectors of the American society and the American economy. People who, even though the country was progressing, was coming out of the deep recession that we had been in, their lives got no better. In fact, they got worse. They worried about the prospects for themselves and for their children. And so we needed to do a better job. Before Donald Trump ever became a candidate, we needed to do a better job of understanding that, reporting on it, writing about the conditions that helped lead to a candidacy of Donald Trump. We didn't do a good enough job then, but we're very determined that that is not going to happen again. We have a whole team of people whose job is to just get around the country as much as possible and reflect the concerns, the attitudes, the worries of the American public.
Yeah, there's another question. Do you think Trump can become a useful evil for the press in general by making people more aware of the importance of the press? I mean, the boost and the subscriptions of the last 6 months is really amazing, right?
Well, I think that has happened. I mean, that's not the phrase that I would use exactly. Yeah, I wouldn't use that phrase, but I think that what's happened is that people who took the press for granted before now no longer take the press for granted. They recognize that the press is going to play an incredibly important role in covering this administration, and perhaps do what Congress won't do, or the courts won't do, or other institutions in our society won't do, and provide them the kind of facts that they feel are important to have in a functioning democracy. And so now they've come to appreciate the role of the press in a way that they had not done before. And they also have begun to recognize that unless they actually support it with their money, that kind of journalism will not exist.
Well, one of the things of Trump was the cable TV, because not only in the rallies but after the debate, they would immediately with 17 candidates in the debate, and all the cable news would go after, give him 50 minutes more of talk. Uninterrupted. But the other thing is social media. Let's talk a little bit about social media in terms of how it gives Trump sort of a disintermediation that he can talk with millions of people direct on one hand, And on the other hand, what is your newsroom policy for journalists and social media, and your strategies on social media?
Well, obviously the president is a big user of social media, particularly Twitter. That is his preferred form of communication, usually early in the morning. So we have to be ready for that.
Yes.
My view is that he's entitled to communicate however he wishes to communicate. He has free speech rights like any of the rest of us. If we can use Twitter, then he can use Twitter, and that's fine. I don't think that, obviously our job is to report on that and to go deeper than the 140 characters that he has available to him in Twitter. But he's entitled to communicate however he likes to.
It's a delicate situation because you end up amplifying what he's saying there, because you reproduce his.
Well, last I looked, I think he has 30 million followers on Twitter, so I don't know that we're really amplifying. I mean, I think our job is to look beneath that, is to provide some analysis of it, to look at what the real policy is, to look at what his administration has actually done, whether it's consistent with previous statements of the administration, whether it represents a new policy that's different from previous administrations. To do what journalism is to look for the story beyond the surface, and that's our job. So he can tweet as often as he would like. He's totally entitled to do that. I would not begrudge him that right, but he himself has to decide how often he wants to use that. As far as how we use social media, we use social media in a variety of ways. Obviously, it's we have a whole team that's focused on how to distribute our stories through social media to make people aware of our stories. We have to recognize that most people are not coming directly to our website and then navigating through our website to find our stories. That's just not how it works anymore. Most people actually are on social media. They find one of our stories, they then click on our story, and we would then want them to click on a second and third and fourth story. And we want them to become attached, to be loyal readers of the Washington Post. So we focus a lot on how to get our stories distributed on social media and what's required to succeed in that environment. But we also use social media as a reporting tool, and that is to listen in on the country's conversation and the world's conversation. It used to be that you would hear these conversations in a cafe or a bar or at a water cooler. We used to have water coolers. Now we have bottles. But that's where you would say, look what people are talking about. And you say, oh, wow, that's an interesting story. Maybe we should look into that. But now the entire conversation is taking place in the public, and all of us can listen in on everybody's conversation. And they're quite open. They're even more open than they would be talking in, well, maybe in the bar they'd be that open after a few drinks. But that's an incredible advantage for us to be able to listen in and understand, well, what do people care about? What are they talking about? And then we use that in the reporting process to sort of find good stories.
There are a few questions about the business model and how to finance good journalism in midst of the crisis in the advertising industry. And the question is how digital subscriptions are working. And I would add something that you used the expression here that day before yesterday you will not use, which is how to support journalism. So the marketing positioning to sell digital subscription now is almost like saying to the citizenry, save journalism. But before you would say, buy this subscription because it's a commercial thing, it's a deal. We're going to give you news that you need, etc. Now the Washington Post say I don't remember exactly, but say support good journalism or whatever. So on one hand, how the digital subscriptions are working, and on the other hand, what do you think about this repositioning of the brand?
Right. Well, I think that that is an interesting distinction, an important distinction, is that we're not asking people to save journalism. We're asking people to support the work we do. When Jeff Bezos was in Italy recently and talking about our business model, He was asked about our motto, this new motto of ours, democracy dies in darkness. And one of the things that he pointed out is that it's like, first of all, this is a statement of our mission, of what we're about, what our purpose is. Do people want to be associated with that purpose? Is this, as he would put it, is this a club that you would wish to belong to? And we want to be a club that people want to belong to, and that they're willing to show their support. They believe in the mission, and they believe so much in the mission that they feel it's worth their while to put their hand in their pocket and give us some money or write a check. And that's what we're trying to accomplish here.
Well, there's one question here about your perception about Latin America and about Brazil, asking if you are following the Lava Jato investigation, and if the Post has any plans to expand internationally and launch editions or any product in other countries like this wonderful country here.
Well, I've been following it. I'm not as expert on it as the people who are here. I'm generally aware of the details and the latest developments and things like that. And you have a hell of a story on your hands. So, I mean, as some people have already pointed out, it might be bigger than Watergate was in the United States. It certainly involves far more politicians than Watergate. And Watergate involved far more government officials than Watergate involved. So, I think it's an important time for the press in this country to pursue a story of great consequence. So, I'm sorry, what was the other part of it?
If you want to expand internationally and open the Washington Post Brazil,
we're not going to do that. I don't think anytime in the near future. We have a large number of international readers. A huge percentage, a very large percentage of our readers are international. And when I quoted you those numbers of over 100 million unique visitors to our site, that is only in the United States. That does not include international visitors. So it's been growing. We want more of them to be subscribers. We are thinking hard about what the opportunities might be internationally and how to approach it. I don't.
You're not going to leave the Gotham City, be the only global newspaper.
No, but I think that that we're interested in how it's very difficult to monetize international traffic, and we think the way to monetize it is through subscriptions. Obviously, we have a more natural audience among English speakers, so when you look at where our international readers are, they tend to be in English-speaking countries. So, but we would like to grow. I think we're only now really beginning to explore what could be a successful model. We're not just going to throw money at it.
How's your paywall working? What is the evolution of the paywall in terms of how many stories you can read and without paying for it?
Right. Well, it differs. We have different experiments going on, right? So I don't want to give the exact numbers here, but we
I insist.
I
insist.
Great. But we have different models, and we're testing different approaches. And but we have consistently tightened the paywall, and every time we tighten the paywall, we get more subscribers, and without sacrificing significant traffic.
Yeah, going back to the Lava Jato thing, one of the criticisms that I hear the most of the Brazilian coverage of the Lava Jato, which I think is great, but it's the weakest part of it is that there is not much investigation about the topic, because the police and the prosecutors are doing so much investigation that the press becomes just repeating what they are. In this kind of complex investigation, do you have any advice or in thesis talking about how to follow a big case like that?
Well, I'm not sure that I really am in a position to offer advice. I don't know enough about.
In thesis, right?
Well, look, I mean, obviously you would like to be out ahead of the prosecutors and actually discover things that they then investigate afterwards. That requires a lot of hard work. There are, I'm sure, many reporters here who are well-sourced, who know how to dig for documents, who know how to do data analysis, some of which people are studying here today, and or over the last couple of days. And those are the tools that are available to us, but I can't really be more specific.
Okay, there's a question here that says, do you think there is a real chance for impeachment with the accusations already available against Trump? Do you feel the story and the accusations will evolve to a point of an impeachment? I will put a PS here and you say, do you need some Brazilians there to help how to do impeachment?
Well, we already have some experience with it, by the way, in the United States. I think it's premature to talk about that. I actually do. I think we're only now seeing the beginnings of a serious investigation with the appointment of the special counsel, who is, the special counsel is a person of great reputation, has a reputation for integrity and independence. And he's hiring a large and very sophisticated legal staff. So I think now and that investigation is really only now getting underway. I think you also have to keep in mind that, and I'm not necessarily making a comparison here, but in the Watergate investigation, people forget how long that took.
Yeah.
It was not something
A year and a half.
No, it was Nixon resigned about 19 months after the inauguration of his second term. He was reelected during that Watergate investigation. And he had very low popularity approval ratings among the American public for a long period of time. And so I think you have to recognize that these things can take a long time. I'm not saying that the investigation of Donald Trump is going to end up in the same place or that the whole political situation will follow the same path. I think you also have to realize that impeachment is not a legal process, it's a political process. And so much depends on what the political conditions are at that time.
Yes. We were talking about international expansion, etc. One of the main things that the Bezos era does and that you did there was to change the focus of a local metro paper into a national paper. But there's a question here saying, would the Washington Post find a way to have a dialogue with Deep America, with the Rusty Belts, or if Hillary was here, I would say, can you talk to the best of the deplorables?
Well, sure. I mean, first of all,
by the way,
that's not a phrase that I would use. So,
no.
And that was a devastating phrase for her at the time. It's not reflective of how I think about anybody in our country. So, as I said, we have a team now of about eight people. We call them the America team, and their job is to get out into the country and to talk to people in all walks of life, to find out what their concerns are, to reflect those concerns, to reflect different points of view, and to do it in a very deep and nuanced way. And that is their job. So, obviously it's up to the choice of individuals as to whether they wish to read us or believe us or anything like that. But we do want to make sure that we reflect the entire country, and that we're not just a reflection of Washington, or a reflection of the coastal so-called elites in the United States. Our job we not only want to tell the country about what's happening in Washington, we want to tell Washington what's happening in the rest of the country. And we want to tell the rest of the country what about each other. And that's what we would like to do.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit back about investigative journalism. In terms, someone is asking the connection between investigative journalism and transmedia or multimedia. Is there something interesting being produced right now that you could share with us in terms? I know that you had lots of experiments in terms of video 360 or in video. Maybe this is a good link to talk about video and your experience and your success and failure in terms of video.
Yeah, well, in terms of investigative reporting, I think that certainly one can use video there. I think interactive graphics has been hugely helpful there. We won a Pulitzer Prize for looking at killings by police fatal shootings by police. And so we continue that work. We have a massive interactive database. People can look up every shooting. They can see who was shot, what the circumstances were, and if the information is available, see the police officer who was involved in the shooting. And then we work on developing, sort of interpreting patterns of what's happened so that people can evaluate it from a policy standpoint. On video, video's been hugely successful for us. There's an appetite among advertisers, there's an appetite among users. I think the younger generation is much more video-centric in the way they consume information. So we are, as I mentioned earlier, we're adding 30 people to our video staff this year alone. That's half of the people we're adding to the staff this year. And so
but you had a bumpy road to get to the success you're having now.
We did. I mean, we had, when we first expanded in video, which was just at the time that I came to the Post, so 4.5 years ago, we thought that we would be sort of, we would put on shows essentially, and that we would be the, ESPN is the big broadcaster in the United States for sports, and we said, well, we can be the ESPN of politics. Well, that didn't work. We spent a lot of money. People don't like shows on video, typically on a website. And so we moved away from shows. We moved toward more explanatory videos, live video. We made sure that every story that could have a video attached to it does have a story attached to it. Now, this is beginning to change a little bit. This just shows how fast things are changing, is that now people are going to video for explanatory material. YouTube sites are developing as destinations of their own. So we do have the opportunity to move back into some kinds of shows. And also people who are getting their video via cable, a lot of people are no longer using cable. They're getting video via the internet. And so they have Netflix, they have Amazon Prime Video. So we can produce mini documentaries, mini news programs for that platform in a way that we couldn't before. It's challenging. People have to discover us first. There's a lot of material out there. How are people even going to know that we're there? But it does represent an opportunity for us. And the thing about video is that many broadcasters are no more advanced than we are in the field of digital video, and digital video is different from broadcast video. And so we have the opportunity to be the disruptor and not just the disruptee. And we would like to be the disruptor.
But I received a tweet from Jeff Bezos now to reminding me to ask you about Alexa. I mean, there is this wave of voice-activated personal assistant. Are you seeing any opportunity there do you have your own product already?
We do. We're on Alexa. You can ask for it. You can get a news briefing there. We're developing more programming for it. We have someone on staff who's dedicated to that. We're also beginning to think about what we can do on the new product called a show. It's called the Echo Show. Remember, it's called Amazon Echo, and yes. The person or the voice you're talking to is Alexa. So now there's an Echo Show, which is a video. It's about the size of a mini tablet, and so that is just coming out, and we're thinking about what can we do there, and it's called. They use this term eyes away video, meaning there's video, but you may not even be looking at it. So this is very hard to think about how you. Somebody might look at it occasionally, but so you need to think about how you do the video so that somebody who's not looking at it can make sense out of it.
Yeah, it's a video that you don't have to be looking to understand what they're talking about, right? It can be almost like radio that also has the...
Right, it has to make sense when you're looking at it, it has to make sense when you're looking away from it.
Let's go back to the spotlight. There are two questions here. One that came in the beginning to asking if you know if the Pope watched it, and if the Pope watched it, if he liked it. But the other is interesting because another question asking if the spotlight had an impact in the spread of investigative journalism in the media in the United States. And I would add, like Watergate did have, and you know, there's generations of people who want to be Woodward Bernstein.
Right. Well, I don't know if the Pope watched it, so I doubt it. But I know that his commission that he set up on clergy abuse recommended that he see it. That was reported. So I don't know that he followed that particular recommendation of the commission, but certainly the commission members watched the video. So I do think it had an impact in the United States and maybe elsewhere on investigative reporting. I think it reminded people why we need investigative reporting and what it takes to do it right, and why it's so essential in a society, in a civil society. And so I do think it also reminded a lot of publishers and owners that this is actually core to the mission of news organizations. You know, for a time, many news organizations were saying we could no longer afford to do investigative reporting. I would say we can't afford not to do investigative reporting. I think if we don't do this kind of work, if we don't hold powerful individuals and institutions accountable, the public will not forgive us. And I don't believe they should forgive us if we abandon that mission. And now I think there is a commercial case that can be made for it, so there's extra reason to be unforgiving of news organizations for not pursuing it. Yes, it's expensive. Yes, it takes time. But it's something that we can do that is truly distinctive. It differentiates us from everyone else. And it is core to our mission, and it defines our identity. And so I do see other news organizations, certainly around the United States, that have recommitted themselves to investigative reporting and have added to their investigative staffs.
Yeah. How do you see the wave of non-profit journalism organizations that are proliferating all over the United States? Do you see any future for that? How do you evaluate? You know, we have ProPublica, which is specializing in investigative journalism, and you have lots of local non-profit. Do you think this is a way to go?
Well, it's one element. I don't think that it represents the future of our business. I think anything more we can do to encourage good journalism, we should do. And if somebody can form a nonprofit that will be successful, I'm all for it. Certainly, ProPublica has been a success. There are people who want to support those investigations at a national level. There have not been a lot of examples of success at the local level or the regional level. Now, in Texas, you have one, maybe the
best.
You have the best.
Texas Tribune, yes.
Yeah, I don't think you can take credit for it, however, but that's okay.
It's not the best or not?
It is probably the best.
Yeah,
It is
I'm not
almost
taking
certainly the best.
credit. I'm just saying the objectivity as a member of the
Okay, all
board.
right, I get it. Okay, I get it. Okay, so I do think that it's a good model, but people have had a hard time replicating that model elsewhere in the United States. So to the extent that we can have nonprofit funded journalism, fine, great, I'm all for it. I don't think it's going to represent the future. I think we who work in profit-oriented news organizations need to find a sustainable business model, and that has to be the future of journalism.
But you see that the New York Times and the Washington Post of life are getting better, etc. But the metro papers in the United States, some of them, or at least one of them, became a non-profit because there was no way to make it profitable again.
Well, the person who owned the paper decided to make that nonprofit. It was an act of philanthropy on his part, and we'll have to see whether it succeeds as a nonprofit. I don't know, but
you recognize that the other metro papers are struggling.
I think that's true, and I think that this was the reason that Jeff Bezos changed our strategy on day one. It was the most important decision that he made, is that we were no longer going to be a fundamentally regional newspaper. We had described our mission as being for and about Washington, of course recognizing that the nation's government resided there, but that it was fundamentally a regional newspaper, and he said that he did not think that that would be the route to success, that we needed to be national, that we needed to, that we had the brand, we had the identity, we had the name, we had the capacity to become national, And I think that's why he bought us. One of the reasons he bought us is he knew that he could take this regionally oriented news organization and make it a national news organization, and he held out the prospect for success. So what is, the future of regional news organizations? It is a huge challenge. It's probably a bigger challenge than we even face. There have been, I think, some successes, I think, in the United States, so Minneapolis, Dallas, some places like that, which have been able to have been able to achieve stability and are doing quite a good job. And I think that each one of those news organizations has to assess its own situation. I do think that, again, when I was in Boston, I spent most of my career in local journalism. So when I was in Boston and we did investigations, not just the Spotlight investigation, many of the other investigations which we did that have not achieved worldwide recognition, but were very important in Boston and the state of Massachusetts, the readers were incredibly gratified by that work. Every time we did stories like that, I would get emails from readers saying, "We're so grateful that you did that. That's why we need newspapers. That's why I support the Boston Globe. Please keep doing this work, because without you, we would have massive corruption in this state. So please keep working at it. And this is why I subscribe to the Boston Globe." And I remember telling our local news editor at the time, I would like to get more emails like this, because I'm tired of the other emails that are so critical of us, but I would like more emails that express gratitude to us. And so we did create essentially a more rapid response investigative team on the local staff at the Boston Globe. Those two have now, the Spotlight and that team have now been merged, which makes perfect sense. But we wanted to produce more investigative stories, and the hope was that that would drive more subscriptions. And my belief is that, my understanding is that if you ask people in Boston, the subscribers to the Boston Globe, the most important reason as to why they subscribe to the Boston Globe, the Spotlight investigative team ranks at least number one or very close to it.
And by the way, the Boston Globe is one of the best results of digital subscriptions in the United States. I think there's no other metro paper that has the numbers that they have. Although it's not extraordinary because the others are very bad.
Right.
Okay, so let's move to fake news. What is your take about the phenomenon of, I gave a pause, that pause was in purpose to
it was
kind of set up the...
Very graceful,
yes.
very graceful transition.
Yeah, I'm very generous. So how fake news has damaged the democracy in the United States so far? The real fake news, not the Trump...
Well, I think it's important to define what is fake news. It's not a term that I particularly like, but what is fake news? Fake news is somebody who deliberately disseminates falsehoods or disseminates conspiracy theories that have no basis in fact. There are a lot of sites that are doing that these days. Let's talk about what fake news is not. It's not a mistake that's made by reporters who are trying to do their jobs right. We all make mistakes. We are a flawed profession like every other profession. We are human because we are human beings, so we will make mistakes. The important thing is that we correct them, that we deal with those issues, and we try to do better the next time. And so that's not fake news. And fake news is not just because the government, which has a certain position and articulates its position or describes the situation, just because if your own reporting does not correspond or align with what the government wants to say, that doesn't make it fake news, because it's not what was in the government's press release, okay? So, or came out of the mouth of the government spokesperson. So that is not fake news. So having defined what it is and what it isn't, I think it does represent a serious challenge certainly to the mainstream press. It represents, I think, a serious challenge to democracy and to civil society. I think that we live in a time now where people can go to any website that they want for information. The so-called information may be actual falsehoods. People have a tendency now to go to sources of, quote, I put this in between quotes, sources of information that affirm or confirm confirm their pre-existing point of view. And not only do they find opinions there that confirm their pre-existing point of view, but they find stories with so-called facts.
Or alternative facts.
That somehow, right, that are not facts, that are falsehoods, but they somehow fit into people's worldview. And so they believe those things. And so we have a lot of people in the United States, and I believe elsewhere in the world, who believe things to be true that are actually absolutely false, for which there is no evidence. And that's a problem, because in a democratic society, we should disagree about the analysis. We should disagree about the interpretation. We should disagree about how to address the policy issues in our society. But fundamentally, we have to agree on the basic facts. When we're in a situation where we can't even agree on what happened yesterday, we can't agree on what the basic facts are, it's very difficult for a civil society to function, for a democracy to function. And I do think it represents a serious threat.
But there is this expression of the post-truth era. Do you think we really are in a, is that serious, that big, that people don't care about the facts if the facts are reaffirming their own beliefs or touching their emotional part that wants to believe that?
Well, I hope not. I think it's a little too early to come to a conclusion about that. I'm always wary of proclaiming it's the post-truth era. I think we have to be careful about making sweeping generalizations about where we are. I think it represents a threat. I think people do really want facts. The question is, who will they believe? Who should they believe? And how, certainly for us in the mainstream press, what can we do to make sure that people understand that we put a lot of hard work into our stories?
Yeah, there's a lot of need for news literacy or media literacy, that people really understand what we do, what we represent. Right? There's a question here you mentioned about, a mistake is not fake news. The question is how much the affair CNN in Russia has affected the cover of this topic, and was the CNN story really wrong? Do you know anything about that?
Well, I don't know anything about that story. They didn't say it's wrong. They said that it didn't. It had not followed the standard. It had one source, and that it didn't follow their standards. So they didn't say that the story was false. And I have no idea. I don't know anything about that story.
Yeah,
so, but sure, of course, something like that is a setback for those of us in mainstream journalism. The president has tried to seize on that, to capitalize on that, to exploit that situation, which is to be expected that he would do so. I don't think it's going to deter other news organizations from continuing with their investigations. I don't even think it's going to deter CNN. I don't think it should deter CNN from doing investigations, whether it involves Russia or any other subject, and because that's the kind of work that we ought to be doing.
Yes. The other question from the public, from the audience, is about the New York Times announcement of layoffs and the copy editing, the copy editors. So the idea is to have more reporters and less editors. And we had someone here who received our main award saying that editors are evil, that the good thing is reporters and reporters versus editors. And I told him yesterday that there was a demonstration in the doorsteps of the New York Times of reporters asking to keep the
copy editors.
Yeah, but reporters supporting the copy editors, saying they save our butts. Don't let them go. What's your position about those layers of editing? And I know that you don't like to criticize the Gotham City newspaper, but maybe you can make a little comment.
Well, I'll talk about the role of editors a bit. I mean, frequently in the past I've been asked whether the paper that I was running was an editor's newspaper or a reporter's newspaper. And I said it's everybody's newspaper. And that we work as a team here, and that everybody has an important role to play. And we don't designate one person's role as being over somebody else's. Reporters, of course, have a huge role in news organizations. but editors have a huge role as well, including copy editors, and including designers, and including photographers, including videographers, and including everybody else who works on our staff is, in my view, very important. For me, one of the great strengths of the Washington Post is that we have a great spirit of collaboration and a recognition that that everybody makes a valuable contribution. I do think that copy editors are important. We have not gone the same route as the New York Times. I think that copy editors represent the last line of defense. It's not just a matter of correcting grammar and spelling and things like that, although it's great to do that, but so the machines can do a lot of that right now, by the way. It's looking for logical inconsistencies, unfairness, holes in stories, tone, all of those kinds of things. And I always tell copy editors when they're starting for us is that, look, just because if the story went through me and it went through my managing editor or went through any other high-level editor, I ask them, would you be willing to raise a question about it, even if we all approved the story, if it seemed like there was something seriously wrong? And they need to say yes, and they need to raise those kinds of issues, because they can't assume just because it went through the rest of us that we actually noticed that we may have missed something, and we need that, and it's important to have a conversation.
Yes, but I heard that the Washington Post reduced drastically throughout the year, even before you arrived, the layers of copy editors that they had, or people who, there's an internal study, a memo or whatever, saying that there were 7.
Well, there may have been 2. I mean, it is possible. Look, I don't know exactly what happened before I got there. Yeah. But yes, in the past there maybe have been too many hands on a story, too many people reviewing it, that all it did was clog up the system. It didn't actually contribute. It actually hurt the process.
Yeah. Well, we are running out of time, but I'm glad that this question came because, because I'm also involved with ICIJ, and one of the only country that I said they had problems to have partnership with news organizations is the United States of America. So, although it's based in Washington, so the question that came from the audience is, what do you think about collaborative journalism like the Panama Papers? What does the Washington Post is the Washington Post engaged in some collaborative efforts like the Panama Papers or other?
Well, I mean, I don't understand the idea that they didn't have a partner in the United States. They did have a partner in the United States. They had McClatchy newspapers and the Miami Herald.
No, in the Panama paper, yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
So, and we have collaborated with the International Center for Investigative Reporting in the past, and subsequent to the publication of the Panama Papers as well. So we know them well. We work with them. We're willing to work with any partner on a story. We like to be in at the beginning. We like to be not just be the recipient of the story at the end of a long process that we had no part in earlier. So that's where we like to be.
Yeah, I was not talking about Panama Papers specific. Panama Papers was the last big one, but there are several others that papers from all over the world accepted, but American big newspapers did not. And the New York Times had even a story about that, or the ombudsman on the Panama paper, that the readers were saying, why are you hidden?
Well, we didn't. We published their first story, yeah. And in fact, we were upset that we were not included as a partner initially in that process, and we expressed our wish to become a partner, and we did become a partner for subsequent stories. They did provide us the data. We did additional work, and we worked with that enterprise since then.
Great. So thank you very much. I think it was great. Thank you.